All right, let's get into football at 4. Johnny Mack, and, of course, you can follow John at JF McMullen. There's some Eagles news out there, but I don't know if John was kind of listening into our conversation there. But just some quick draft thoughts, if you have any off of our conversation there. They're at 21. Do you think they, right now, just on the surface, based on what Howie said, that 21, we stay there, draft 10 guys, see what shakes out? Or is there wiggle room to move up because they have 10 picks?
I don't think so this year. Howie's been pretty clear that because of the past 2 years, really, where they've only had 5 total picks, they need bodies, they need volume. I think more likely more than 10 than less than 10. So I think they kind of know they have to get a lot younger. I did hear you say, there's 30% roster turnover. So your goal is, and a lot of GMs, started that figure, 10 picks. Your goal is to have all those 10 picks in your program, not necessarily on the 53. That's going to be difficult, but on the 63 with the 10-man practice squad. So I think that's where they're more likely to go, trade down, add picks more than trade up because they just haven't had the volume over the last 2 years. But I got to tell you guys, I'm still reeling from this Graham Harrell news. I don't know what the heck this team is doing. But I do know every single coaching decision, it just gets me to the point of Doug's not making these decisions.
Well, let's just real quick so the listeners know what you're talking about. The Eagles are interviewing Graham Harrell, the Southern Cal offensive coordinator. If you remember, if that name sounds familiar, he was a quarterback for Texas Tech under Mike Leach when Leach was at Texas Tech, and now he's the Southern Cal OC. But that seems like a name, I guess, out of the complete right field, right?
Yeah, I don't even know if he's on the field. I think they got him from the concession stand. But for a couple reasons. One, he's an air raid guy. He's been an air raid guy. Yeah, he played in the NFL. He played with Green Bay a little bit as backup quarterback in the New York Jets. So obviously anybody who's been in the profession a long time, you're brought in and you have experience with other offenses. But as a coach and as a player, air raid, which, a couple things. I don't like that offense for the NFL to begin with. But then you look at the Eagles and their personnel. You want more receivers on the field? You want trips on one side? You want 4 receivers on the field at all times when you have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert? This is one of those where you hope they're just doing their due diligence and just talking to a young guy who they think is bright. And by the way, if he has the aptitude to change his philosophy, but remember, Clay Helton hired Cliff Kingsbury to be the offensive coordinator. He immediately left because he got the head coaching job in Arizona. So he went out and got this guy specifically to run that offense. And that's what he runs, and that's what he knows. And I don't understand why the Eagles would have any interest in that from an NFL perspective and from a personnel perspective.
Well, he's a quarterback who played in Green Bay. So, Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, there's the natural connection there, John, just the pedigree on that. I'm kidding.
The
I'm
Green
being
Bay
facetious.
Part is the only thing you can point to. But from a coaching perspective, again, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
from
I know.
Coaching perspective. He's air raid.
Is it possible?
And like I said, why do you want more receivers on the field if you're the Philadelphia Eagles? Unless you assume you're going to hit home runs on, 3 or 4 different receivers in the offseason through free agency in the draft? Good luck with that.
Right. I haven't checked who Harrell's agent is, and I'm just wondering if it's possible that this is kind of due diligence and an agent getting it out there, and we're all kind of in a tizzy about it, and it's really in the end. I am
in the tizzy.
Yeah, I can tell. And you should be. You're making great points. I just wonder, though, how realistic it really is just because it's been reported that he's interviewing for OC.
No, and that's my hope. My hope is it is one of those deals where you're trying to, let's be honest, a lot of these coaching searches, not only for major positions, but even positional coaches, a lot of it is and you do it from a public relations standpoint. You already know what you're going to do, but you bring in names to pretend You're doing your due diligence. I hope that's what's going on here. I just don't understand. And this is, and also Philip Daniels getting essentially fired today. What is going on with this coaching staff, with this organization? I mean, if you look at Philip Daniels and Carson Wallace, they were both here. They both got promoted. What did you learn about those guys in 1 year that you didn't know in the 2 or 3 years before? The only thing I can surmise is, and if you look at all the injuries on both aspects, wide receiver certainly, and I talk about it all the time, there's a PR aspect to that just because there was certain narratives that Carson Wallace was bad at his job. You didn't have that with Philip Daniels.
Right.
And there was a ton of injuries, and he got near the same level of production. So I don't – this strikes me, and I talked about this the day Mike Rowe was fired. This strikes me as scapegoating, and that is the first step to say the head coach is on notice, to be honest.
John, if you could build the ideal offensive coordinator right now, because we talked about this earlier, and I've been saying this for a while now, but I genuinely don't know who the right guy really is to fill that void right now. So there used to be those Build-A-Bear workshops, in the malls. So if you could build an offensive coordinator, what would he look like? Is it a younger guy? Is it a guy that maybe has been around the block and is like that father figure, for lack of a better way to describe it, who can be a voice of reason with Doug? Like who would you ideally go with?
Well, I think experience is important. I think this league got into the Sean McVay, sort of, we all make a joke about that, and rightfully so, because for a while there, it was like, well, he knows Sean McVay. He met Sean McVay. He had coffee with Sean McVay. He's Sean McVay's valet. So you're all of a sudden, you're a hot commodity. I don't think there is any template. I think it could be a young guy, can be an older guy. I don't think any of that has anything to do with anything other than, look, I think if you look at it from any life experience, I don't know too many people who are 40 and say, you know what, I was a lot smarter at 30. I don't know anybody at 25 that says, you know what, I really knew what I was doing at age 20. As you go through life, you learn things, you learn lessons. So I do think experience is important, and I do think from a football perspective, I think getting experience in different philosophies is important. So we just talked about Graham Harrell being an air raid coach. That's what he's done. That's what he's hired to do. I think he's got to go out and learn some different things. As Jeff pointed out, he was in Green Bay, so he got to learn a different system as a player. That's part of it as well. But I think you need that as a coach as well. And I think you also have to be, and I always gave Pat Shurmur a ton of credit if you look at his background. And obviously he's a West Coast guy, but he came here with Chip Kelly, and he had an open mind, and he learned the good things from that system as well. I think that, to me, makes a good offensive coordinator, being willing to look at other philosophies, other systems, learn from them, and then you look at your personnel and take advantage of that particular personnel. And with the Eagles, it starts, to me, with the tight ends. So I say, why are you talking to an air raid guy unless he's willing to say, I'm going to play a lot of 12 personnel, not play air raid?
Well, someone who is familiar with 12 personnel, and I think that people, John, kind of bristle at his name, and Gil did it earlier when I brought it up, but I think that it would make some sense, is Marty Mornhinweg. He knows the scheme, he knows the system, and despite what people think of him when he's been offensive coordinator for the Eagles especially, their offenses have always ranked, I think, in the top 10, if not top 5. How would you feel about Mornhinweg there if Doug went down that road?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have any problem with Marty Mornhinweg for everything I just said. I mean, he's been in a lot of different philosophies over the years. He's run a lot of different scheme with a lot of different personnel, and he's got a lot of experience. But the downside of that is, the bad. Around a long time in this league, you have some down years. And people label you, and then then the PR aspect comes into it. How do you sell this guy? Like you'll already see the Graham Harrell stuff, and people say he's a young, innovative offensive mind. You're already going to see that. I've already seen it. The air raid's been around since, like I said, it's an offshoot of the run and shoot. Really go back to BYU. That's where it started in the 1970s. It's neither new or innovative. But if people say it 100 times, they start believing it. So the selling is a big part of it as well. And it's easier to sell a Graham Harrell than it is to sell a Marty Mornhinweg. Yet, who's the better football coach? I'm going to go Marty.
Well, and then we kind of touched on yesterday a little bit, but you got the other recycled head coaches, the McCoys, the McAdoos, the Jay Grudens, that group of the more, accomplished, I guess, if you will, because they were head coaches. Do they push the pile because they say, hey, look, when I was in San Diego, I did this with Rivers, or I guess McAdoo would be more, hey, when I was in Green Bay, I did this with Rodgers. I mean, having a guy with that kind of experience and NFL experience as opposed to a guy you're just rolling the dice on.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Ben McAdoo's a perfect example of that, and what I was just talking about. There's a lot of hurdles to hire a guy like that. But to me, I mean, the Eagles wanted him to be the head coach of this organization. So if you could bring him back as an offensive coordinator, why wouldn't you do it? And I don't know if they have that opportunity, but I don't know.
He's been out of the game for 2 years. You would think he would have interest, though, right?
Oh yeah, he has interest in getting back in. I'm not sure if the Eagles have interest, and I think it's purely driven by what I just said. It would be a tough sell. It would be
sell for who? For Doug or the fans?
It would be a tough sell to the fan base, to the public. And that's what you deal with when you have guys who are failed head coaches. You talk. I constantly hear about Jim Schwartz, and Jim hasn't been a head coach for a long time now. And people say, "Well, he was terrible as a head coach." It's a tough sell once you've been deemed a failure, and that's not just Philadelphia. That's every city, and that's some of the things you have to overcome. But this city's a little bit different because there's such a focus on the football team, and there's just so much interest and so much intent. And like I said, as strange as it sounds, you can, everybody can pull up Marty Mornhinweg's resume because we just mentioned it. Look at that resume. Look at Graham Harrell's resume. Now, if you'd be more comfortable with Graham Harrell, you're just –
well,
you're
John,
jumping off a cliff.
The way the NFL is gone, coaching-wise, the shiny new toy is the popular new toy. You got the McVays, LaFleur, who's in the championship game in his first year, being a very young play caller. All these guys that got head. I mean, everybody's leaning that way.
Yeah, and no question. But you also have that adjustment period, and we saw the Super Bowl. Belichick versus Sean McVay. Sean McVay has never really recovered yet from that Super Bowl. Let's see if he can. I don't know if he can, and we'll see if he's able to do that moving forward. You saw Matt Nagy take the league by storm. That was Jeff and I's best prediction, I think, collectively. We told all of you the Chicago Bears were taking a big step back this year. Yeah. And my reasoning was because of the schedule, last place schedule, the first place schedule, and also people were going to adjust to Matt Nagy, and that all the eyewash wasn't going to work the second time around, or at least work as well. And that's what you see. There's constant adjusting in this league. And we always use that term copycat. And it is a copycat league, but I always say it's a very, very slow-moving copycat league. So you generally get to the off season. That's what defensive coordinators are doing now. They're going to, in fact, I'm going to make the same prediction with Green Bay. They're going to have a more difficult time next year because of a first-place schedule. Because I don't know if really defensively it's the strength of that team. It's not Matt LaFleur. It's not play calling. That has been the detriment of that team to this point. And people are just going to get, look at it more and more and more and make it more and more difficult.
It feels like, John, that there is a trend developing of having these hybrid coaching staffs. We saw Dallas last year where it's kind of Marinelli controls the front four and Chris Richard calls the back end defensive concepts. And, of course, I think McVay doesn't have an offensive coordinator. He has a passing game coordinator and a run game coordinator. And even with the Eagles, you have Jeff Stoutland, who's in charge of the running game. And Doug, we know, calls the plays. I wonder if the Eagles, now having been turned down by James Urban and who knows who else they've interviewed and what the response they've got, kind of gravitate toward that. And even with Philip Daniel gone and Jim being a defensive line guy, I wonder, because they always pride themselves on being on the forefront of analytics and cutting edge of doing things differently, if they start to integrate that style of coaching staff into their operations.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, Andrew Berry, I'll compare it to Andrew Berry's interviewing in Cleveland today for their GM job. And, we see these titles in the front office, Vice President of Football Operations versus General Manager. But what is a real general manager? Do you have control of personnel or vice versa? In a lot of ways, coaching has gone that way too. And I would argue the Eagles already have that. They just didn't change because, as you mentioned, Mike Rowe was the passing game coordinator, and Jeff Stoutland was the running game coordinator. But they just didn't tweak the titles,
right?
And they didn't go down that road. They've already used that philosophy. Maybe they changed the titles.
Well, especially if it's a tough sell. If it's a Graham Harrell, right, and they know for all of the reasons you just outlined that it's a tough sell, but they change his name from OC to passing game coordinator. You and I both know that that's still fishy because of the passing concepts he believes in compared to what they do. But I feel like the fan base just feels like, oh, air raid guy passing. They like that idea. It's almost like an easier sell to the public when you do it that way.
Yeah, perhaps. And that could be a route to go. If you want to go with a younger guy who doesn't have experience, who doesn't have the proven track record, and then you sort of take the pressure of offensive coordinator away from that young coach. One of the issues is the media. And one of the reasons why the Eagles didn't change the titles is because if you name a passing game coordinator and a running game coordinator, they both have to talk to the media every week. Whereas if you label somebody as offensive coordinator, only the OC has to speak. And anybody who knows Jeff Stoutland knows pretty gruff guy, doesn't want to deal with us every week.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, that's why I think the Eagles went the route they went. And it could be as simple as that.
Well, for what you're saying, that's a great opportunity to take Deuce Staley, call him the offensive coordinator, put him in front of the cameras, but have Harrell or anybody and Stoutland really be your passing and running game coordinators.
Yeah, you could do that as well. It is just really a shuffling game, and it is titles, and a lot of times the title doesn't mean as much as what you actually do. Remember, Deuce Staley's the assistant head coach already.
Right.
And running backs coach. What does that title mean? Assistant head coach. Doesn't mean much, to be honest. It is, from a selling standpoint, if you like this guy and say he's a very young coach and we think he can develop, and be a really, really good coach 3, 4, 5 years down the line, that might be a way to take some of the pressure off him, no question.
John McMullen, Football at 4. We do it every day at this time. And by the way, John, I got to congratulate you and for the fall ratings period, which just came out. This segment is the number one rated afternoon segment, period, right here, 4 o'clock, Monday through Friday, football at 4.
Well, I thank you, Mike, and it's all because of you guys as well, and Mike Gill and Ryan Rothstein, Jeff Mosher, Josh Henning. I want to thank you guys for making me look good.
Yeah, well, keep the number one YouTube streams up over, 800,000 YouTube listens for football at 4, and the ratings in today, this segment here, the number one most listened to segment of the show. So, Johnny Mac, thank you.
Hey, thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
And Johnny Mac, like
Thanks,
all
John.
guests, appeared to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.